Hi, I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. And it's summer, officially. But because it's summer, do you know what that means? That means there are 4 months until Halloween. I can just feel the spookiness, creepiness, little goblin energy just surging up inside of me. Which is why when I saw this fake book thing at Michael's for half off, the first word that popped into my head was Necronomicon. Followed by... Probably shouldn't say that. Anyway, if you couldn't tell by all of this buildup, today we're making the Necronomicon.
Oh my god.
Today we're making the Necronomicon from Evil Dead 2, which is my favorite of the Evil Deads, I think. I haven't seen the newest one though, so maybe I shouldn't say that yet. But I love the Evil Dead franchise, and I've been wanting to make this book for a long time, so when I saw this, it was meant to be. It felt right, you know? So this is a fairly easy project. I did it in about 6 or 7 hours, all in one sitting, because once I start, I can't stop. Wasn't that like a Pringles slogan? Once you pop, you can't stop. Anyway, I'm so excited to take you along the journey of how this process went. So let's get into it. All that I used for this project besides the book that I got at Michael's was craft paper, like the packaging brown paper you get in packages. So hot glue, chipboard, acrylic paint, craft paper. That's all you need. And of course, what would any Clever Ghoul project be without some Mod Podge? Of course, that made an appearance. So to start, I took a bunch of this craft paper that I had and I just wrinkled it up even more than it was already wrinkled. And then I took it and laid it out, put the book on top of it, and just made sure it would fit everywhere, like you're wrapping a present. And then I just started hot gluing. I started with the cover, then the spine, and then the back. Then I cut off any excess, folded the edges in and hot glued them down, and we were good to go. From there, I noticed the sides of the book box were really white. I mean, obviously it's meant to be a fake book and it's a cheaply made like sticker with like some gray lines on it, and I didn't like that. So my first attempt was to paint it brown to kind of age it. I knew it wasn't really the right move, but at the same time, I just had to try it out. What I really wanted to do was have like ripped pages kind of sticking out from it, so it looks like this handmade, old, antique, ripped up, beat up Book of the Dead that it is. And so I knew that I had to make those pages that would actually stick out. I took some chipboard, cut it in 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch strips, and then I took craft paper and I basically just hot glued it to it. I would rip it up into small pieces, fold it into little accordion bits. So I would just glue and stick craft paper everywhere, just folding it, pressing it in there, putting smaller chunks in there, longer chunks, just making it look really ripped up and haggard and like it's been around the block for millennia. So I did that on 3 separate strips. Before gluing them down, I would hold them up to the pages. If there were any spots of the book peeking through, I took some of that craft paper and just hot glued it down in that spot. And then I hot glued down the 3 strips of pages that I had just made. I repeated the same process on the top and bottom of the books as well. Once I'd glued down those pages to hide any seams, what I did was I opened the box and then I glued another piece of craft paper along the edge to make it look like another sheet of paper was sticking out. And that just helped hide any seams that might have been showing. It also helped so when you're viewing it from above or from outside, just holding the outside of the book, it just looks really cohesive and blended everything together nicely. Now it's time to focus on the outside of the book. So to do that, what I did was I looked up some images online and freehanded the placement of where the eyes, the nose, the mouth would all be, where some of those bigger veiny bits, gross, would be, and then the direction of like where the skin was kind of going. So I drew that all out with a pencil and a Sharpie, and then it was time to start building up the texture on the book. So to do that, I noticed that only some of the like veinier bits on the top were thicker in reference images. So I took some of that craft paper again, take a strip, fold it in half, put a little bit of hot glue and start twisting it up to make almost like a rope-like piece. And then I would wind it around what I had just drawn and glue it down with hot glue and hold it there to really just get that extra bumpy, lumpy texture. I did this also with the face, with the eyes, the nose, the mouth, adding some extra chunky bits to make it really stand out. And once I was done with that, it was a little too rough of a texture for the face. So I took strips of craft paper and hot glue and just basically smoothed it on and sculpted it over those big ridges I had just made and kind of flattened it out that way. I repeated this around the whole face and then started working on the spine and the back of the book. I also added some hot glue lines and squiggles where I had drawn them here just to add extra texture, because not all of the bumps on the book are super huge and raised. Some of them are more flat. Hot glue came in clutch for those other little bits and pieces where I needed texture. On the back of the book, I did the same thing I did on the front, drawing out the rough shape of where things were. There's also an ear on the back of the book, so I drew that out. And then once everything was drawn out, I did the same thing I did on the front, taking a piece of craft paper, adding some hot glue, twisting it into a rope-like sort of shape, and bending it along the area that I just drawn to make those raised edges. I also did the same technique of using the paper and hot glue to smooth out the ear to make it look like one cohesive sort of lump. And then I added again more hot glue just around attaching it to the spine, attaching it to the front, just adding those final bits and pieces of texture in. Once everything was to my liking, I pulled out the glossy Mod Podge, and using my finger, I took an extremely thin layer and just massaged it into the book itself, into the paper. This kind of helped make a little bit of a leathery looking effect, which I really liked, but I didn't want to use too much. I just wanted to use enough to kind of seal the paper, but not too much that it was like super shiny, glossy. It was just sort of a step to help prime and get the book ready for paint. So once the Mod Podge and everything was dry, it was time to add paint, which I'll admit was kind of a nerve-wracking part at first because I really liked how it looked and I was scared I was gonna mess it up. So I started by using a brown acrylic paint and a deep gray acrylic paint. It's more of a warm, deep gray. I mixed those two together and started dry brushing it into the cover of the book. I did use my fingers in some areas. I used my fingers a lot in this project. It's like doing makeup with your fingers. Sometimes you just get a better payoff that way. Now that I'd added in brown and it dried, it was really starting to look even better than it had a minute ago, and I was so excited, but I knew I had to keep going. So I added some more of that deep gray by itself using a paper towel, just kind of dry sponging it in. I would dip the paper towel into the paint, wipe off any excess, and just sponge it in areas. The deep gray was really great because it added depth, but it also added some like charred sort of look to the skin, which is what I assume would need to happen to use flesh to bind a book. Ew.
Sentences I never thought I'd say.
The deep gray was really great. I used it a lot in the mouth and the eyes and the nose as well to really deepen those areas and make them look a little more sunken in and like the book looks. So once that charcoaly color had set in, I took burgundy and that same deep gray, mixed them together, and just using my fingers would take a light layer of it and press it into certain areas of the book, adding more of a gore, viscera sort of element into the book cover itself, which is gross, but that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be so gross, and it is pretty gross. I mean, it could be grosser, but ooh, it's so gross. This part really made it look really grody, and I loved it. I guess it's not grody though. I should take cue from the movie and say it started to look groovy. Groovy. Also added some of that burgundy color into the mouth and eyes just to get even more gory and bloody and icky. Once that dried, I knew that I had to add some highlight back in to pop out the face and ear especially, and some of those veiny elements. So what I did was I took a honey brown acrylic and again using my finger just lightly pressed into areas where there needed to be highlight, where I wanted things to stand out, like the ridges of the mouth and the eyes and the nose, the ridges of the ear, some of those veinier bits. Adding that in around the book too lightly helped tie in just the creepiness, the grossness, and just married everything together nicely. So with all that being said, I guess it's time for the reveal. Okay, so here we are. I think it looks so good. I am so impressed with myself, but also so proud of this project. And this was only 7 hours. Now imagine if I spent like a whole week on this. This thing could look insane. This really reignited my love of making horror crafts. Anyway, so here she is. Yes, it opens up and is a box still. No, I didn't make any of the creepy pages because we're not trying to summon any deadites into this household. No, thank you. She looks amazing. There's the spine and there's the ear on the back. I just think the combination of all the paint and glue and everything just really made this come to life. to Afterlife. I do want to go and seal it, maybe add some glossy in some areas and more matte in some other areas. But for now, I love this project. It makes me so happy. I've been feeling like a little bit of a craft rut lately, and this really brought me out of it. So I guess sometimes you just have to summon on the minions of hell to just get your mojo back, you know? Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me over on TikTok and Instagram at cleverghoul.yt. And I'll see you next week. Bye!